saw the illustration.
Is that from the house?
Please join me in welcoming to the stage Guy Pearce. So much for being here. I'm so glad to have you.
It's quite alright.
Stress that enough.
Just so you know, I've just watched the film with you, so I'm sort of in terms of taken back into that world as well, which is.
So just before we start, we have about 35 minutes for this conversation, and we will open it up for audience questions. So please do have a think about something that you might like to ask. But I'm going to kick things off with Memento, because I mean. You've made some iconic films, including Memento. Films that it's hard to imagine haven't always existed. For me, films like LA Confidential, like Memento. And so I wanted to start by asking about the script and that moment that you had it in your hands and what struck you about it, what you can remember. I realise it's a while ago now, but you know, what that experience was like and if you were aware of what you were holding.
Yeah, it was a while ago. I remember my agent had read it and really liked it, and he stuck a note on the front of it saying, "This is great, by the way, it all goes backwards." Which was good that he wrote that, because I think I would have had to read it sort of 3 times to get my head around what it was. But I was really struck by it. I was struck by the fact that it felt emotional, even though it was the jigsaw puzzle that it was, that it still had this sort of emotional core to it. And then I remember quite quickly, somewhere in the process, watching Chris Nolan's film Following, and was really taken by his style, and then being really panicked that this was so good and that, you know, everyone else was going to want to do this too. So I met with Chris, and you know, obviously had a good chat with him. So I remember being really, just being super impressed by it, and you know, really feeling keen to get involved. Yeah, I'm super lucky now that I did.
Yeah, I mean, and you've mentioned Nolan, and it's hard to think back to a point where he wasn't the Christopher Nolan, but this was his second feature, and I wondered if you could tell us a bit about what it was like working with him as a second feature filmmaker. And
well, surprisingly accomplished. I mean, he just sort of arrived as the full package. You know, he was sort of the. I mean, I'd worked with a few directors. I'd done a few films before this, but it really seemed apparent to me that he was as across the technical side of things as he was across the performative and emotional side of things as well. So he was very articulate. I mean, he's kind of a nerdy guy, Chris, so he sort of has a slightly awkward quality about him, but he's really honest, really genuine, and really enthusiastic about what it is he's doing, and really sensitive, and you know, so he just was the complete package. He was really impressive. And it was a quick shoot. We shot the film in 25 days. Well, actually, we got an extra day at the end, and the last 2 days of the shoot were to be scheduled, all the black and white stuff in the motel room, and which I was rehearsing on my own in my motel room where I was staying throughout the course of the film. And I remember thinking through this whole process, well, there's no way in the world we're going to fit all this into 2 days. This is crazy. And I kept saying to the producers, well, we're not going to do this. And then Aaron Ryder said to me in that last week, you know, I've got a gift for you. So, oh, really? What is it? He said, day 26. So we got to work on that Saturday as well. And even then it was really tight, trying to get everything we needed in that motel room. Because as you see, there's a lot to do, a lot of detailed stuff. So, but Chris was just really efficient, a real joy to work with, you know, so, and everything was location based. So we would spend a week at the, you know, at Carrie Ann Moss's house, and then we'd spend a week, you know, in a different location. So we just sort of moved about and, you know, locked down
we talk about, well, I talk about Christopher Nolan as, you know, a huge figure, and of course he is. And if you look at your back catalogue, your work, you've worked with people from William Friedkin, Todd Haynes, Ridley Scott, Catherine Bigelow, John Hillcoat, Tom Hooper. I mean, I could carry on.
Do. No.
It's quite extraordinary, the directors that you've worked with, and I'd love you to talk a little bit about ways of working that you've experienced with these different directors over the years, and how, if there are any kind of commonalities between them, or things that struck you as very different from one to the other.
Well, it's interesting with directors because it's the relationship, it's everything as far as I'm concerned, and it's this feeling of trust, trusting each other that I need in order to do what it is we do. And I've been in situations where, and it's funny because I've worked with lots of first-time directors and I've worked with lots of very experienced people, and it doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, one is going to be better at what they do than the other. I've worked with first-time directors who are just amazing. I mean, Chris, obviously it wasn't his first film, but it was pretty close to it. And then I've worked with some very experienced people who I sort of instantly had a difficult time with, where I've had to kind of go, okay, I'm on my own here. I'm completely on my own. I just have to trust what I'm doing, because either I'm not getting anything from them, or we don't trust each other, or you're really rubbing me the wrong way. And so it's a sort of a matter of survival. And it's a terrible fear that I find I have going into every job, because you just don't know what you're going to get. And obviously we have meetings and we talk about things beforehand, but you know, often things don't really come to the surface until there you are on set and you go, okay, this is going to be a tough 3 months. You know, so I've had a couple of tough situations, but I'm a lot better these days anyway at assessing that beforehand. And I think, yeah, ultimately it's that trust. I mean, and I think a good director goes, these are the lockdown things, the sort of pillars of this structure that we're making that we can't compromise with. And I, as in the director, am bringing in all these other great artists, and I have to trust them to do and bring me what it is that they do. And when a director does that, whether it's with the actors or the composer or the caterers, you know, it's fantastic, because then you all sort of fly together and you all feel inspired together. And I've been with directors who at times are just too controlling. And it's not to suggest that it's a bad thing that they know what they want, but I've often felt really sort of overly managed, and that kind of can get really difficult, you know. But most times people are great. Most times people really, they just want to make a great thing and they want you to come on board and do it with them. But yeah, everyone's different. Some people, you know, want to rehearse a lot. Some people don't want to rehearse at all. Some people don't want to talk about anything. And, you know, so you get this whole gamut of, you know, any actors here would know, you just get this whole entire gamut of variations. So it's fascinating, really. And when you've got a great director, I've worked with Nick Murphy, I mean Brady, who I currently have the Brutalist out with, you know, and Ridley and all of the people you mentioned, just, you know, really just extraordinary people who, because to me, the most exciting thing is when a director has much better ideas than I have. I'll suggest this and they'll go, yeah, but what about this? And I go, oh, yes, let's do that. You know, that's fantastic, because otherwise I'm just limited to my box of tricks. So if I'm doing a job where I am on my own and I'm having to look after myself, then I know it's going to be a limited performance. So yeah, the director is key, really.
I mean, you mentioned rehearsal periods, and I was really curious, looking back at your work, if you could maybe think of a time when there's been a rehearsal period that has really greatly impacted key scenes or key sections of a film, where you felt you've really benefited from that, or if you kind of prefer to go in cold and let it all happen.
I never prefer to go in cold. I'm a theatre actor. I grew up doing theatre, and I just got so used to that process of being in a room together and literally sort of moving chairs and tables around and going, right, so if you're here, and then what if I do this, and finding this sort of going through this process of finding it physically and really relying on that. And that's just how I knew it to be. So by the time you get to actually do what it is you do, you're all over it. You're all over and I'm quite, I don't know, I'm quite particular. I'm a lot better these days than I was. I had a kind of a number of years where I really struggled with no rehearsal. Like, it was a real test, and I get quite angry about it. And particularly, I think, because you end up then rehearsing at home on your own, and you end up sort of coming up with the character and sort of doing what you're doing and finding the voice and all that sort of stuff. And then you turn up on day one and start doing it, and then you get some executive who goes, "Yeah, don't do that thing with your voice. Yeah, maybe don't do that." And you're like, "Fuck you, buddy." I've been working on this at home. I'm not changing a thing now. So you end up in this sort of battled kind of situation straight away, So, I mean, we rehearsed Memento. We had a little church hall somewhere, and a lot of it is just discussion and sitting around a table and talking about it. But I have to get up on my feet. I have to really get up on my feet and kind of see whether or not the momentum of an action should be this kind of energy or that kind of energy, So Chris was great in being able to have, and funnily enough, it's usually the smaller films. Like in Australia we rehearse, little independent films, always be 2 weeks of rehearsal in some hall somewhere, and you're taken away to do costume fittings in between, and it gets broken up, but at least you feel like you've gotten underway. And then I started doing studio films in Hollywood, and there's no rehearsal on that at all, and there's this sort of weird, terrified sort of anxiety. So that's where I had my instances where executives would come and tell me to stop doing what I was doing, and I said no. A lot. So any rehearsal is great as far as I'm concerned.
To The Adventures of Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, in '94.
30 years ago.
So the world of drag has changed a lot since then, and I wanted to ask what it was like to delve into this world back then, and how you researched the role, the community, the art of drag, and the performance aspects themselves.
It was amazing. I mean, we had a great couple of rehearsals on that, and actually in that 2-week rehearsal process, which was obviously, as I mentioned, sort of involved costume fittings too, which were quite sort of extraordinary. And we had two very, so Timmy Chappell and Lizzie Gardner, our costume designers, who are just a pair of drag queens themselves. Big personalities and lots of fun, and come over here, darling, try this on, stick this on, and there was a lot of gaffer tape sticking things on, and it was all very cheap and nasty and great fun, and Stefan, who wrote and directed the film, had always said to us, what we're going to do on the last day of rehearsal when we do camera tests, and you're going to be in full costume and full makeup, and we're going to do some camera tests. We're going out that night in drag in the drag scene in Sydney. Ready? We were like, yeah, sure, that's going to be fantastic. So we did that, and that was kind of amazing, because all these local drag queens were like, who are these bitches? Oh, Jesus Christ. We looked amazing, of course. So it was really funny, and I mean, that was sort of thrust into the deep end of the world of drag. We met a number of drag queens along the way who would come to rehearsals and all say, this story's based on my life, don't you? It's all completely based on my life. About 57 different drag queens told me that my character was written based on their life. So it was quite a funny experience, even around the world. We promoted the film in London, and I had drag queens in a nightclub there telling me that my character was based on their life, because Stefan had met them once before. So it was really funny experience. It was awesome. I mean, it was great. And I think just through that rehearsal process, meeting other drag queens there, going out that night, where Hugo ended up really drunk under a table somewhere, and I had to try and drag him home. I remember that was quite funny. And Bill Hunter was there with us as well, sort of keeping an eye on us, looking out for us, protecting us. That was a pretty amazing. Also, because prior to that, I'd been on Neighbours, and I'd done a couple of other things in between. But I was this daggy guy playing Mike from Neighbours, and then all of a sudden I was playing a drag queen, which is I think why Stefan cast me, because he thought it was pretty funny to stick Michael names in the dress. So it's fine with me, you know. So it was a good laugh, really. Yeah.
And I have to ask before we move on from Priscilla, if you've had any updates from Stefan about Priscilla 2.
We are discussing it quite a bit at the moment, so we're going back and forth on ideas and things. So Hugo and Steph and I are chatting. Terence is in the mix as well, obviously. So it would be great to do if it really felt credible.
Fantastic. Okay, we're going to move again in time now. There's going to be a lot of this to LA Confidential. I've heard you say of filming this one that I felt like I was at film school and I was learning how to act for the camera. Could you talk a bit more about this experience and if there was perhaps a scene or a moment that really stands out in the process of making the film?
I'll preface it by saying Curtis Hanson was meant a great deal, and to sort of to work with him and learn from him was a really it was an incredible experience on that film. I was going to say I may cry talking about it. So, it's good you didn't notice that. It broke my heart when he died. But it was the first time I'd worked with a director where I felt I was being tutored. And I think he taught me about stillness, basically, and about just trusting that we are interesting people even if we're being still. Because I think as actors we tend to think we've got to jump about and be interesting and move around a lot in order to be noticed and be, relevant. So that experience, and Russell too, Russell was fantastic for me on that job. He gave me a hard time as well at times, but he was looking out for me, There was a little moment I remember when, I think it was during the interrogation sequence where I go from room to room, and I came out of one room into a close-up and then sort of went into another bit. I can't remember exactly, but Russell came up to me at one point and he just went, "Don't blink when you walk up to camera." Okay, thank you. just little things like that we as actors know mean something feels far more powerful than not. Trusting that you can be still. So, Curtis taught me that. He took me under his wing and he was a great mentor for me, even for years after that. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Sticking with LA Confidential, because I rewatched it last night and I was struck by what an incredible ensemble cast it was, that you just forget, because I think in your memory you just think, well, it's Russell Crowe and Guy Pearce and that's the film, and but actually it's Russell Crowe, Kevin Spacey, Kim Basinger, James Cromwell, Danny DeVito, Ron Rifkin, David Strathairn. The list is just endless, and I wondered to what extent you're aware when you're working on the film, because obviously you're very focused on what you're doing, but if you're aware at the time of what an ensemble you are part of, and if there's elements of, well, I'm coming in on that day because I'm not involved, but there's an incredible scene that's going to happen between these two, or
I don't think I went in on any days that I wasn't involved in. But the thing you have to remember is it was my first American film. I'd never worked in America before, and then all of a sudden I was on this thing, So it was a pretty amazing way to start. And Russell and I were the first two people cast in that. He was the first person cast, and I was the second person cast. And we had a long rehearsal period for that film. And which really consisted, the first 4 weeks of that rehearsal was just me, Russell, Curtis and Brian Helgeland in this room together. And then slowly over the weeks, different actors would turn up as they cast, Kevin's role, Kim's role, Danny's role, etc. And I was just going, wow, okay, this is pretty good, But through that point, I was sort of getting to know everyone, and you know, the sort of the mystique and the sort of majesty of who these people were was sort of fading a bit. I really was reminding myself, you know, okay, these are working actors, and you know, etc. So, but I do remember watching the first rough cut or fine cut of that film, and really being amazed by it at how good it was. Also, how good it looked. I mean, Dante Spinotti, the cinematographer who shot it, you know, it was funny actually, because I, as I say, I'd done Neighbours, which was shot on video, and then when I did my first film in Australia in 1988, a film called Heaven Tonight, it was shot on film, and I remember going to the dailies and seeing myself on film and kind of having this weird reaction to it, because there's a more three-dimensional quality to film, obviously, than video. And then again, there was even a more three-dimensional quality to what Dante was shooting, and I was just so taken by that. It's so interesting to see yourself on film like that, and to try and assess that. So that experience was just extraordinary, really, you know, on all sorts of levels. So yeah, all downhill from there.
Well, I'm going to time jump again to the proposition. So, because I heard you say the other day, well, probably a while ago, I was heavily YouTubing you, that The Elephant Man is your favourite film of all time. And of course, you got to work with John Hurt on the proposition. And I really wanted to ask what that was like, and if you working with someone who is such a feature in something that you value so highly, and if there's anything you can share about your experience with him.
Well, firstly, I'll just say that I did Count of Monte Cristo in 2000 in Ireland, and I very briefly got to work with Freddie Jones, who was also in The Elephant Man. He played the keeper of John Hurt's character, the Elephant Man. And when I saw Freddie, I couldn't believe it. I'd grown up watching The Elephant Man, and I have a sister with a disability, and that film really struck me. I've never seen anything like it. Still to this day, I kind of haven't. I watch it once a year. It's black and white, as we know, and it's stunning performances by Anthony Hopkins, and so I saw Freddie Jones on this film we were on, and I said, I just have to say, you know, how much The Elephant Man means to me. And he was, by this point in his life, an old grumpy drunk, and he said, oh, fuck off. So I was really like, wow, okay. I'm going to work with John Hurt in The Proposition. I better not say anything about The Elephant Man. And John, at that point, had just stopped drinking, so he was really grumpy in 2004. And it was funny because we had a scene in The Proposition where when I first meet him, I sort of beat him up, I think, in this bar, and then later in the story, he captures me and ends up putting a rope around my neck and sort of dragging me or walking me, you know, across these sort of stones, and I was in bare feet, and I'm sort of trying to breathe with this rope around my neck, going, sounding like the Elephant Man, and that John's in my ear saying, "You only got me because you were drunk," you know. So it's this full-on sort of moment, and I thought, I can't let this moment go by without saying something about the Elephant Man, and I took the punt and I said it, and he said exactly what Freddie Jones said to me. And I thought, he basically said, you know, it was sort of really sort of gruff reaction to it. So don't say that stuff to your heroes. It's really, you know, it's funny. I'm a huge fan of Kate Bush, and I keep getting this opportunity. Well, not I keep, but I've had these sort of opportunities at times to meet Kate Bush. I'm like, no way in hell am I meeting her. It's going to be Freddie Jones and John Hurt all rolled into one. It's not. But that film, I mean, the Proposition, that was a really special film for me, because I'd also taken a huge break for a year or two. You know, I'd worked through the late 90s in America and had a little bit of a sort of exhaustion breakdown, and was really grumpy and hating everyone and sort of having a difficult time on films. And I thought, I've just got to step away and reassess all of this. Because I'd worked as a kid in theatre, as I say, and then I got into Neighbours when I was 18, and the next thing I knew, I was making LA Confidential, and it was sort of, you know, just one thing after another. And there I was, kind of still working as an actor, which was sort of a decision based on who I was as an 8-year-old. So I needed to kind of just reassess, I think. And so I took all this time away, and I was at home one night. I've told this story before, so people have probably seen it, but I was at home one night with a friend of mine smoking a joint. I was really stoned. And my phone rang. I don't smoke anymore, just so you know, and I don't condone drugs. My phone rang, and then the answering machine came on, and this voice went, yes, Guy, it's Nick Cave calling. There's a script that's been sent to you that I've written, and well, we'd like you to read it. And they seem to think that if I call you, you might. I know you're not reading things at the moment. They seem to think if I call you, you might actually sort of read it. So there I was scrambling around, trying to find this script, and it was the proposition, and it got me back into work again. It really sort of, it kind of. I just felt really motivated and really excited by it, and I was ready to stop smoking and to come back to work. Yeah.
I don't know if this is still the case, but I did hear you say that it was your favourite film you've shot.
Yeah.
Of yours.
Yeah. I'm a huge fan of this. I'm not as keen on my work in this as I am in the proposition. Huge fan of LA Confidential, obviously. Huge fan of Priscilla. But there's something about the proposition. If I could make films, that'd be the kind of film I'd make. I think the tone of it and the internal pain of it really struck me, and yeah, I thought it was really amazing, and I think it meant a lot as well because it was Australian. It's Australian, so yeah, that was a pretty extraordinary experience as well. I've had really lucky, amazing experiences, to be honest.
When we were thinking about a film to screen tonight, we were so spoiled for choice, and it was, all these films would look incredible on the big screen. That's the thing, but ultimately, Memento won the day. But before I open it up to the audience, I just want to ask one more thing, because The Brutalist, obviously, you've probably heard, is about to be released in the UK on the 24th of January, and there's a huge amount of critical praise for the film already. And with this film, as well as many of the other kind of huge hit films that you've been in, I wondered to what extent you were aware before they're released of the impact that they're likely to have.
Well, I guess it depends. I mean, I can tell when I watch a film straight away whether it's worked or not. I feel like I can. It's just sort of what we know as actors, I guess. I mean. And I've watched films that I've done, like a pre-screening of it or whatever, and kind of gone, damn, it doesn't kind of come together the way that it should. Or, at the other end of the spectrum, you have LA Confidential and the Brutalist. And, with the Brutalist, obviously I read that script. It was great. I found it really moving. I looked at Brady's other work and just went, wow, a bit like Chris Nolan, where I just kind of went, wow, this guy's amazing. I really want to be part of this. And then, of course, we made the film, and Brady was delightful to work with, really just encouraging, and a fantastic relationship that I had with him. He's great with actors, really, really great. And then my American agent, Chris, called me months and months and months ago, or texted me, to say that he'd seen a rough cut of it and said, I feel like I've just watched an Orson Welles movie. And I remember thinking, oh, okay. Sounds like it might be quite good. And then I didn't see it until Venice. So, of course, I'm aware now of the effect that it will have on all of you, because I've seen the effect that it's had on people in Venice, and I felt the effect that it had on me when I watched it. It really is a glorious piece of filmmaking. So I know as soon as I see something. I remember with Priscilla sitting on a plane with Terence, we were flying from somewhere to somewhere doing press for it, and talking about the effect that the film was having, and it came at a really great time, I think, Priscilla. So, I was aware of, having done Neighbours and how popular that was over here, for example, but I didn't really understand why. A lot of blonde people in it and swimming pools and stuff, so, I got that, but it certainly didn't feel like the work was really kind of knockout. But I started to recognise that with things that were good, like Priscilla, like LA Confidential, so it's great when they're good.
On that note, I'd like to open it up for the audience. So if you have a question, please do raise your hand. We have mics on either side of the aisle. Oh yes, we have one down here, third row.
Good evening, Guy. Thank you so much for being here tonight. You have such an incredible filmography and such an amazing range of performances. You've spoken about the great directors you've worked with, your difficulties, the special moments. I just wanted to ask, it might be just a straightforward, simple question, but what is the most important lesson you've learned from your career, which has had the biggest influence and on you personally, which has shaped you the most, like personally, on a personal level?
Well, thank you for the question. It's funny. I'm sort of thinking as you're asking it. I mean, I've been a very anxious person in my life, and I think the greatest test for me and the greatest lesson, if I've learnt it, and the greatest way that I can sort of honour my craft is to get past that anxiety. Is to be able to completely inhabit a character that doesn't carry the anxiety that I used to carry. I don't really carry it anymore. I can at times, but I don't really. And I can sadly watch performances of my own sometimes and just see that from the past, like this one, for example. So when I feel myself improving as an actor, and I can look at the work that I do and just quietly to myself go, yeah, good, this is working, this is good, because I'm not seeing Guy being anxious, I'm actually seeing a character here. That's been the greatest challenge. I know that's not necessarily the greatest thing that I've learned, but it's certainly been the greatest challenge for me. And I think as far as, I think I've always had humility, I think I've always been relatively humble, but I certainly think that trying to maintain that through a crazy career like this is a great lesson, because we can be lauded stupidly sometimes, and we can be also, stuck in the mud as well. So it's quite an extreme public experience that you have. So I think finding some sort of balance through life where I sort of hang on to or find the real validity within myself and the real strength within my own heart, etc. That's the important stuff. This is amazing to do what I do. Like, it truly is, and it's not even so much because it's public, but it's just because I get to express myself in all these different ways and explore this. So it's a fantastic job, but to try and maintain stability throughout it is, I think, a great lesson.
Oh, yes, we have someone right here down the front on the right.
The shoot off a flag.
Oh, if you just wait 1 second for the
microphone.
Thank you.
Thanks. I was going to ask, what was it like playing Kim Philby, and how did you get on with Damian Lewis?
I loved Damian Lewis. He was almost intimidating because he was so good and really smart, and in fact it was amazing playing Kim Philby. Doing A Spy Among Friends was a really extraordinary job, especially because Nick Murphy was our director and Alex Carey had written this thing. So watching Nick and Alex and Damien together as this sort of brainy trio was so impressive. It was a really difficult job as well. I had a lot of lines to learn, and I had to really look like I was confident enough to be able to just let them trip off the tongue. So it was really tough, but it was so good. The work was great. I remember actually meeting Ben McIntyre, who wrote the book A Spy Among Friends. We sort of all had this sort of pre-shoot dinner thing, and I was going to get to meet Ben McIntyre, and he's half Australian, and he came running over to me and he said, what do you think about Kim Philby? I said, don't ask me, you wrote the book. Why are you asking me? I was going to ask you. So it was quite a funny way to sort of begin. It was a fantastic experience, yeah. And I'm still just as mystified about Kim Philby now as I was then. I mean, there have been great scholars trying to understand him for years, so I don't stand a chance.
Does anyone else have? Oh, yes. So right up in the middle, sort of to the left. If you could keep your hand up, thank you.
I know my friend Daniel is here. He's going to ask me a really difficult question. You may.
I'm not Daniel.
You are not. No. Although, how do I know you?
Well, exactly. Thank you very much, Guy, for being here. I found myself enjoying the film a lot more watching it this time than the first time around, and I wondered whether it was because I found it actually incredibly relevant today, in a different way than perhaps 25 years ago, in kind of a world where truths are questioned regularly. And I just wondered, given you just watched it with us as well, what your reflections were watching it today. And like all great films, it's aged very well, but that real relevance as opposed to where 25 years ago was interesting, provocative, different, today felt it gave me kind of completely different thoughts. So really interested in your perspective.
Well, I'm not sure what I think about how relevant it is today, to be honest. I would have to think about that before I could give you a really honest answer. I was just so focused on watching whether my performance was any good or not. Struggling along with that. But obviously struck by the genius of Chris Nolan. I mean, he just, no one has a brain like that. And to be able to, you know, the interesting thing, I remember Chris talking about writing that script and writing it from start to finish. And as we know, you know, half the story goes forwards and half the story goes backwards. And by the time you get to the end of the film, we are only halfway through the story. So the movie, as we know, starts with the end of the story and the start of the story, and then they meet in the middle at the end. And for him to be able to write that, to write those two things together, and yet maintain perhaps some sort of standard or usual devices that we rely on in films, where there are peaks and troughs and emotional kind of, you know, the emotional journey of a character, is just extraordinary, really. I mean, we know he's extraordinary. He's certainly proven it many times now. But just being reminded of that again in our lovely little intimate film. So, yeah, so again, I'm just sort of struck by how, what a genius he is, you know. Yeah.
We've probably got time for one more question. Oh, there's a gentleman just 2 people over from you. The lady who just had the mic. Oh, the mic was returned. If we could make the way back, thank you.
Hello. I was wondering what kind of notes would Chris Nolan give you between takes, and how often would he give you notes? Thank you.
Well, it's hard to remember now, to be honest. I had amnesia. He gave me lots, but I couldn't remember any of them at the time. I don't really know. I think, I honestly have to say I don't really remember. I mean, they were obviously kind of specific at the time. And I think because we'd rehearsed anyway, I don't really have a memory of him giving me a lot of notes, because I think we got to rehearse for a couple of weeks and sort of lock things in a bit, you know. I'll have to come back to you on that one.
So.
This man here.
Oh, okay.
Yes, Daniel.
Could we get a mic for Daniel?
Who's the greatest actor I've got to work with? Yes, Mr. Ings. I think it's you. So there we go. Do you want my microphone? Oh God, here we go. So Daniel and I have just worked with each other in a film called Woman in Cabin 10. And Daniel, I have to say, is extraordinary. Who's seen The Gentleman? Nobody? Daniel Ings, everybody.
So here's my... It's quite
Over projected.
I just wanted to say that I loved you in Deadpool and Wolverine, and what's it like working with Ryan Reynolds?
It's hard to see me in the back of that shot in Deadpool and Wolverine, isn't it? If you look closely, you know that it's me.
You're the guy in the yellow suit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you know, sometimes. One of those Australian actors. Have you got a proper question?
Actually, do you know what? My brother-in-law texted me a question.
Did he?
I am going to ask this because I think he was like, asked this question. I think he was taking a piss, but I think it's quite good.
Give it a go.
It's really 5 questions rolled into one. Can you ask Guy Pearce, how is violence a means towards justice reflected by the movie? Is it portrayed as a necessary means towards achieving a just end? Does it only perpetuate itself in a fruitless cycle? Do you think Leonard, or anyone for that matter, is violent by nature?
Before you answer, guys, we have about a minute left.
Yeah, do I think he's violent by nature? I'll ask, what was the last bit? Do I think he's just violent by nature, naturally?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, he's ended up that way, hasn't he? He's ended up that way.
Sweet, thanks, man.
As I mentioned, Guy's next film, The Brutalist, is on release from Friday the 24th of January, but we're very lucky to have a special preview here this coming Saturday the 18th, and there are still a handful of tickets available. I would really highly recommend coming along to see it if you can. Guy has an incredible performance in the film, and you won't be sorry for making the trip out to see it on the big screen. But sadly, that is all the time we have this evening. We have to whisk Guy away up the very long staircase, so if everyone could please remain in your seats, that would be amazing. But please do join me in thanking Guy Pearce.
Shame you didn't get to ask your question.
I know, I didn't wave hard enough.
You need
God
to
damn
just
it.
stand up. I'm too far away here.
Wear like reflective clothing,
I
you
don't
know?
think you could see us from back down there.
It's quite far, and I feel like when you're presenting this stuff, your cone of vision's very low, so you don't get overwhelmed, right? Yeah, because when you see this many people in the audience, you get nervous. So she's probably seeing about 10 people. Did you enjoy the movie, guys?
Yeah.
I hadn't seen it in a long while.
We watched it again about 4 days
No,
ago.
you didn't. You're bigger fans than I am.
We saw it back when it first came out.
I'm jealous.